By 5:12 a.m., the garage already smelled like cold metal, burnt oil, and coffee that had been reheated too many times. Isaiah Brooks stood beneath the hood of a faded Ford pickup with a flashlight between his teeth, one grease-darkened hand steady against the engine block while rain tapped softly against the corrugated roof overhead. The storm outside wasn't heavy. Just stubborn. The kind that stayed all morning and turned every pothole in South Chicago into black water. He tightened the final bolt slowly, listening more than looking. Engines talked if you gave them time. Most people didn't. Behind him, a small cough echoed from the office corner. Isaiah glanced over immediately. Caleb sat wrapped in an oversized gray hoodie at the little folding desk near the window, shoulders curled inward, drawing rockets on the back of an old invoice. His inhaler rested beside a half-finished cup of apple juice. "You should still be home," Isaiah said quietly. Caleb shrugged without looking up. "And miss your world-famous waiting room?" That earned the smallest smile from Isaiah. "Barely there. But real." The boy's backpack sat beside the desk, worn at the corners, one zipper held together with black tape. Hanging from it was a tiny plastic astronaut missing one arm. Caleb had refused to throw it away. Said broken things deserved another shot. Isaiah wiped his hands on an oil rag and crossed the garage floor. He crouched beside his son, pressing the back of his fingers lightly against the boy's forehead. Warm. Not terrible. But not right either. Caleb looked up. "You got that look again." "What look?" "The one where you pretend bills aren't real." Isaiah exhaled softly through his nose. Kids noticed everything. Especially the things adults tried hardest to hide. On the cluttered counter behind them sat an unpaid medical invoice folded beneath a coffee mug. Next to it lay a repair estimate for the portable breathing machine Caleb needed at night. $840. Due Friday. Isaiah had looked at that number so many times it no longer felt real. Just another mountain with his name on it. The garage phone rang before he could answer. Sharp. Old-fashioned. Loud enough to cut through the rain. Neither of them moved at first. Then Isaiah stood and picked up on the fourth ring. Brooks Auto. Silence. Not empty silence. Expensive silence. The kind wrapped in polished floors and people paid to wait before speaking. Then came a woman's voice. Calm. Precise. White glove cold. "Is this the mechanic?" Isaiah glanced toward Caleb, who had gone back to drawing but was listening anyway. "Depends what's broken, ma'am." A pause. Brief. Like she wasn't used to answers that didn't immediately bend. "My driver says your shop still makes house calls." Isaiah leaned against the counter, eyes drifting toward the rain outside. "Sometimes." "Good. I have a Rolls-Royce that refuses to start." There it was again. That tone. Not rude exactly. Worse. The kind that assumed the world solved itself when she spoke. Isaiah reached for a pen. Location. Ashford Estate. Lake Forest. Even Caleb looked up at that. Everybody knew the Ashfords. Old money. Charity galas. Magazine covers. The kind of family that owned buildings with their last name carved into stone. Isaiah wrote the address carefully anyway. "I can be there in an hour." 30 minutes. Isaiah's eyes flicked toward the storm outside. Then toward Caleb's inhaler. "Roads are flooded on the south end." That sounds inconvenient. The line went quiet again. Somewhere far away, he could almost hear crystal glasses and polished marble. Then the woman added, almost absent-mindedly, "Fix my Rolls-Royce and maybe I'll let you marry my daughter." Caleb's pencil stopped moving. Isaiah didn't react immediately. Didn't laugh. Didn't bite back. He simply lowered his eyes to the oil stains on his knuckles. Men like him had spent lifetimes learning when pride cost too much. "I'll fix the car, ma'am." Another pause. Smaller this time. Curious. "You're very calm for someone being insulted." Isaiah looked toward Caleb again. The boy was watching him now with wide, tired eyes. Learning from him the way children always do. Learning what kind of man silence could build. Isaiah picked up the old truck keys from the counter. Rust scratched the edges smooth from years of work. People usually insult you when something in their life isn't running right. The woman didn't answer for a second. Then, softer now, though no warmer, she said, 30 minutes, Mr. Brooks." The call ended. Rain hammered harder against the roof. Caleb stared at him across the garage. "You gonna marry her daughter?" Isaiah grabbed his jacket from the hook by the door. "I'm gonna diagnose a fuel system." Caleb grinned faintly, then coughed again into his sleeve. Isaiah's smile disappeared almost instantly. He crossed back over, zipped the boy's hoodie higher, then rested a rough hand gently against the back of Caleb's neck. "Steady. Protective. Lock the office if I'm late getting back." Caleb nodded. "Dad?" Isaiah looked at him. The boy hesitated before speaking. "Don't let rich people talk to you crazy." Something shifted in Isaiah's face then. Not anger. Something quieter. Older. He adjusted the strap on Caleb's backpack where the taped zipper had split again. "A man decides who he is before he walks into a room," he said softly. "Makes life easier that way." Outside, the old truck groaned awake beneath the rain. Isaiah pulled onto the flooded street while gray morning swallowed the city block by block. 27 miles north, behind iron gates and trimmed hedges, Victoria Ashford stood beside a black Rolls-Royce with her arms folded tightly against the cold. Her blonde hair was pinned back in a careless knot that still somehow looked expensive. Security lights reflected off wet stone behind her. She looked composed. Untouchable. But her eyes kept drifting toward the rear passenger door of the car. Toward something only she seemed to notice. Then one of the house staff approached carefully. "Miss Ashford, should we cancel tonight's engagement dinner?" Victoria's jaw tightened almost invisibly. "No, and Miss Emily?" Victoria looked toward the dark second-floor window above the garage. A curtain moved. Just slightly. "Emily will be downstairs," she said. But even she didn't sound certain. Then, somewhere far down the long rain-soaked driveway, the headlights of an old pickup truck appeared through the fog. The old pickup looked smaller the moment it rolled through the Ashford gates. Smaller. Dirtier. Like the rain itself had judged it before the guards even could. Isaiah eased the truck forward slowly beneath rows of trimmed hedges and towering stone lanterns glowing gold through the storm. Somewhere deeper inside the estate, fountains spilled into black water gardens while soft piano music drifted faintly through hidden speakers. Money had a sound. Quiet. Controlled. The security booth ahead lit up red. One guard stepped out immediately, broad shoulders beneath a tailored raincoat, one hand already raised before Isaiah fully stopped the truck. "Deliveries use the south entrance." Isaiah killed the engine. "I'm here for the Rolls-Royce." The guard's eyes dragged over the rust near the truck door, the oil stains on Isaiah's sleeves, the old toolbox strapped down in the bed. Then over the cracked astronaut keychain hanging beside the ignition. "Name?" "Isaiah Brooks." The guard pressed a finger to his earpiece. A second later his expression changed just enough to become colder. "Miss Ashford expected a mechanic." Isaiah nodded once. "You found him." Behind the booth window, another guard smirked without bothering to hide it. Isaiah had seen that look before. Men deciding your worth before hearing your voice. The first guard finally stepped aside. "Stay on the driveway. Don't wander." Isaiah said nothing. Just reached across the seat for his old toolbox. The metal handle squeaked when he lifted it. Inside, tucked beneath wrenches and socket sets, sat Caleb's folded rocket drawing from that morning. Isaiah noticed it immediately. Didn't remove it. Just closed the lid gently and stepped back into the rain. The mansion rose ahead of him in pale stone and enormous glass. Warm light glowed through windows taller than his entire garage office. Somewhere above, movement flickered behind a curtain. A woman watching. By the time Isaiah reached the circular drive, 3 members of the household staff were already waiting under the covered entrance. 2 maids. 1 assistant with a tablet pressed against her chest like a shield. And Victoria Ashford herself beside the black Rolls-Royce, perfectly still despite the rain mist curling around her heels. Up close, she looked even more composed than she had sounded on the phone. Cream-colored coat. Gold earrings. The kind of posture built from years of never being interrupted. But her eyes carried something else now. Fatigue maybe. Or pressure hidden beneath polish. Victoria glanced once at Isaiah's truck behind him. You took 42 minutes. Isaiah set the toolbox down carefully beside the car. Flooded roads don't move faster for poor people, ma'am. One of the maids looked down immediately to hide a reaction. Victoria didn't. Her eyes narrowed slightly, measuring him again. Not offended. Just recalculating. You always answer like that. Isaiah crouched near the front wheel without looking up. Only when people time me before saying hello. Silence stretched between them. Not loud. But sharp enough for everyone standing nearby to feel it. The assistant stepped closer toward Victoria. Miss Ashford, perhaps we should wait for Bentley Motors instead. Isaiah heard it. So did Victoria. Bentley Motors can't get here for 3 hours, she said flatly. Tonight cannot be delayed. Isaiah's hands moved calmly beneath the hood latch. Steady. Precise. Rainwater rolled down the back of his neck while security cameras rotated silently above the entrance. He felt them watching. Wealth always watched the help. A sudden cough echoed from behind him. Small. Weak. Isaiah turned instinctively toward the sound before realizing it came from a child standing under the doorway beside one of the housekeepers. A little boy visiting with his mother maybe. No older than 7. The child stared openly at Isaiah's grease-stained hands. Mom, the boy whispered too loudly, is he homeless? The air tightened instantly. The maid looked mortified. Victoria's jaw shifted almost invisibly. Isaiah simply wiped his hand slowly on the oil rag hanging from his pocket. No, buddy, he said quietly. Just employed differently. The boy blinked. Then nodded as if that somehow made sense. Victoria watched Isaiah a second longer than before. Something there didn't fit the picture she'd already built of him. Most men in his position either laughed too hard or got angry too fast around people like her. Isaiah did neither. He just worked. If you've ever had to stay calm because somebody else was watching how you carried yourself, you probably already understand Isaiah more than he'd ever explain out loud. And if stories like this still mean something to you, stay with it. Upstairs, a door opened faintly somewhere inside the mansion. Isaiah heard heels crossing marble. Then silence again. He leaned deeper beneath the hood. That was when he noticed it. A thin silver scrape near the locking mechanism under the dashboard. Fresh. Too fresh. Not from wear. From force. His expression didn't change, but his fingers paused for half a second over the metal. Someone had been inside this system recently. Deliberately. Behind him, Victoria folded her arms tighter against the cold. Can you fix it? She asked. Isaiah kept his eyes on the damaged mechanism. Maybe. That doesn't sound confident. He closed the hood slowly. Rain drummed across the black paint between them. Cars don't usually beg not to start, ma'am. For the first time since he arrived, Victoria looked genuinely still. Then her gaze shifted toward the second-floor window again. The curtain upstairs moved. Just slightly. And this time Isaiah saw it too. A pale hand disappearing from the glass. Then, almost at the same moment, one of the security guards hurried across the driveway holding a silver bracelet in a plastic evidence bag. "Miss Ashford," he said carefully, "we found this under the rear passenger door." Isaiah's eyes dropped to the bracelet instantly. Small silver charms. One missing link. And engraved across the inside in tiny letters were the words, "For when you're brave enough to leave." The apartment above Brooks Auto always smelled faintly of detergent, burnt coffee, and engine oil that no amount of scrubbing could fully remove. By the time Isaiah carried his toolbox up the narrow staircase that night, the city outside had already dissolved into sirens and distant train brakes echoing through wet streets. His shoulders ached. Not dramatically. Just the slow ache of a man who spent too many years lifting things heavier than he talked about. The hallway light flickered twice before settling into a weak yellow glow. Apartment 3B stood at the very end beside a window that never fully shut in winter. Isaiah unlocked the door quietly. Inside, the television played low static from an old science channel Caleb had fallen asleep watching. The boy lay curled sideways on the couch beneath two mismatched blankets, one sock half hanging off his foot. His inhaler rested on the coffee table beside a bowl of untouched cereal gone soft hours ago. Isaiah stopped there for a second. Just watching him breathe. Parents who worried all the time learned to count breaths without realizing it. Slow meant safe. Sharp meant trouble. Tonight was somewhere in between. Isaiah set the toolbox beside the kitchen counter and carefully loosened the stiffness from his fingers. The silver bracelet from the Ashford estate stayed in his mind longer than he wanted it to. Especially the engraving. For when you're brave enough to leave. Wealthy people hid their pain prettier than poor people did. That was the only difference sometimes. The refrigerator hummed unevenly while Isaiah opened a cabinet and pulled out a nearly empty box of pasta. He checked the second shelf. No milk. Half a loaf of bread. One apple. He closed the fridge gently, then unfolded the stack of bills waiting beneath a magnet shaped like a rocket ship. Rent. Electric. Hospital balance. The portable breathing machine estimate sat at the bottom. $840. Due Friday. Isaiah rubbed his thumb slowly over the paper before folding it again with careful edges. Like neatness itself could buy another week. Behind him, Caleb stirred awake with a cough. "You fixed the rich lady's car." Isaiah glanced over while filling a pot with water. "Still deciding if it wants help." Caleb smiled sleepily at that. His hair stuck up in 3 different directions. "Rich people got problems too." Isaiah turned the stove knob until blue flame flickered beneath the pot. "Everybody's got something leaking under the hood." Caleb watched him quietly for a moment. Then his eyes drifted toward the old toolbox near the counter. "What's that shiny thing?" Isaiah followed his gaze. The bracelet. He hadn't realized he'd slipped it absent-mindedly into the side tray beside his wrenches after the guards bagged it and then left it sitting out during the confusion at the estate. Isaiah crossed the room calmly and picked it up before Caleb could. Cold silver against rough hands. One broken link near the clasp. "Belongs to somebody," he said simply. Caleb squinted at the tiny engraved words inside. "Sounds sad." Isaiah looked down at the bracelet longer than necessary. Then slid it quietly into the top kitchen drawer beside old takeout menus and spare batteries. Not hidden. But not displayed either. Caleb coughed again into his elbow. Isaiah immediately reached for the medicine bottle beside the sink and checked the remaining doses. 2 left. Maybe 3 if stretched carefully. His jaw tightened almost invisibly. "You got school tomorrow?" Isaiah asked. Caleb nodded. Career Day Friday 2. The words landed heavier than the boy intended. Isaiah remembered instantly. The promise. He'd told Caleb he'd come this year even if work got busy. Last year he missed it fixing a transmission overnight. The year before that, pneumonia kept Caleb home entirely. Isaiah moved the pot before it boiled over. I'll be there. Caleb studied him with the brutal honesty children carried naturally. Even if the rich people call again. Isaiah set 2 chipped bowls onto the counter. Especially then. The boy smiled faintly and relaxed back against the couch cushion. Outside, rainwater rolled down the apartment window in crooked silver lines. Somewhere downstairs, someone argued through thin walls before a baby started crying 2 apartments over. Real life. Loud. Tired. Unpolished. Isaiah carried Caleb's bowl over first before serving himself. Habit. Always the kid first. While Caleb ate slowly beneath the blanket, Isaiah sat at the tiny kitchen table repairing the frayed strap on the boy's backpack with black thread and a bent sewing needle. His mechanic hands looked too large for delicate work, but they moved carefully anyway. Patient. Controlled. The television murmured softly about stock markets and luxury real estate while the silver bracelet sat hidden only 10 feet away in the drawer. At nearly midnight, Isaiah's phone buzzed across the table. Unknown number. He let it ring once before answering quietly. Brooks. A woman's voice responded immediately. Not Victoria this time. Younger. Professional. Nervous underneath. Mr. Brooks. This is Evelyn from Ashford Estate. Isaiah's eyes lifted slowly toward the dark window over the sink. Something wrong with the car. Silence crackled faintly through the line. Then Evelyn lowered her voice almost to a whisper. Miss Ashford wants to review the security footage again. Isaiah's expression didn't change. But upstairs, somewhere inside the mansion miles away, Victoria Ashford had just paused a camera frame on her screen. And for the first time all night, she wasn't looking at the Rolls-Royce. She was looking at Isaiah's hands. The rain had stopped by morning, but the city still looked waterlogged and gray when Isaiah pulled back into the Ashford estate just after sunrise. The windshield of the old truck rattled softly with every pothole in the long driveway. Beside him on the passenger seat sat Caleb's inhaler, a half-eaten granola bar, and the folded school form for Career Day Friday. Isaiah had signed the bottom already. Promise first. Figure out the rest later. The estate looked different in daylight. Less mysterious. More intimidating. Marble fountains. Black iron fencing. Gardeners trimming hedges that probably cost more than his rent. Security cameras watched from every corner like silent judges. At the front entrance, 2 staff members paused their conversation the moment Isaiah stepped out of the truck. One glanced at the toolbox in his hand. The other glanced at his skin. Both looked away too quickly afterward. Evelyn met him near the garage entrance with a tablet clutched tightly against her coat. Younger than he expected. Mid-30s maybe. Tired eyes. Miss Ashford wants you inside, she said quietly. Isaiah nodded once. No questions. No hesitation. Just that same controlled calm that somehow made nervous people speak softer around him. As they walked through the service hallway, polished floors reflected the overhead lights in long pale strips beneath their feet. Somewhere upstairs, dishes clinked. Staff moved quickly. An engagement dinner still had to happen tonight whether anyone was ready or not. Evelyn slowed slightly beside him. The security team thinks you may have tampered with the vehicle after hours. Isaiah kept walking. Then your security team should buy better cameras. She looked over at him sharply, surprised by the answer. But there was no arrogance in it. Just fact. They entered a smaller office near the rear wing of the estate where 3 security monitors glowed against dark wood walls. Victoria Ashford stood near the center screen with her arms folded. Controlled as ever. But today the control looked thinner around the edges. One of the guards from yesterday stood nearby with a legal pad, clearly ready to document whatever happened next. Isaiah noticed immediately that the bracelet sat on the desk now. No evidence bag. Just silver against black wood. Victoria didn't invite him to sit. You recognized something in the car yesterday, she said without greeting. Isaiah glanced briefly toward the paused camera footage on the screen. I recognize damage. Damage caused by? Don't know yet. The guard stepped forward before Victoria could answer. Convenient. Isaiah looked at the man calmly. Truth usually is. The room tightened slightly after that. Victoria studied him carefully, almost irritated by how little he reacted to pressure. Most people either shrank in rooms like this or overperformed inside them. Isaiah did neither. He simply stood there in work boots still damp from the driveway, one hand resting lightly on the handle of his toolbox. Victoria tapped the remote once. The footage began moving. Grainy black and white video from the garage camera. The Rolls-Royce. Empty hallway. Rain streaking the lens. Then Isaiah appearing beside the vehicle yesterday afternoon, kneeling near the passenger side. The guard crossed his arms immediately. Pause there. Victoria obeyed. Why did you stop working for 12 seconds? Isaiah looked at the frozen frame. His own image bent beneath static and rain blur. I heard movement inside the car. The vehicle was empty. No, Isaiah said quietly. It wasn't. Silence. Even Evelyn looked up from her tablet. Victoria's expression shifted almost invisibly. You're saying someone was in the Rolls-Royce? Isaiah didn't answer immediately. Instead he walked closer to the monitor, studying the angle. Then he pointed toward the lower corner of the screen where a faint reflection trembled against the rear window. Small. Pale. Almost impossible to notice unless you knew where to look. There, he said. The guard frowned. That could be anything. Isaiah stepped back again. Could be. Victoria replayed the footage slowly herself this time. Once. Twice. Her jaw tightened. Because now that he'd pointed it out, she could see it too. A figure shifting inside the back seat moments before the system failure. Upstairs, somewhere deep in the house, a door slammed hard enough for the sound to echo faintly through the vents. Everyone in the room heard it. Isaiah's eyes lifted instinctively toward the ceiling. Listening. Measuring. The way mechanics listen to engines before touching tools. Victoria noticed that too. You have children, Mr. Brooks? She asked suddenly. The question caught even Evelyn off guard. Isaiah glanced once toward the bracelet on the desk before answering. One son. And if he hid inside a locked vehicle? Isaiah finally looked directly at her then. Calm. Steady. I'd ask why he felt safer there than outside it. The words landed quietly. But not softly. Victoria looked away first. Just for a second. Just long enough to betray thought instead of certainty. Then the office door opened sharply behind them. A man in an expensive charcoal coat strode inside without knocking, irritation already written across his face. Grant Mercer. Tall. Controlled. Polished enough to look dangerous without raising his voice. His eyes moved from Victoria to Isaiah in less than a heartbeat. Then down to the bracelet sitting on the desk. And for the first time since entering the room, Grant Mercer stopped smiling. Grant Mercer carried wealth the way some men carried weapons. Casually. Confidently. Like everyone else in the room should already know where they belonged before he spoke. He stopped beside Victoria's desk, eyes still fixed on the silver bracelet. I was wondering where that went, he said lightly. Too lightly. Isaiah noticed that first. Men told the truth differently when they were scared. Victoria folded her arms tighter. Emily said she lost it yesterday. Grant reached for the bracelet immediately, but Isaiah spoke before his fingers touched it. Careful with the clasp. The room paused. Grant looked over slowly. Excuse me. Isaiah nodded toward the broken link. It'll snap completely if it's forced again. Again. The word hung there quietly. Grant's smile faded by half a degree. Security shifted uncomfortably near the door. Evelyn lowered her eyes to her tablet, pretending not to notice the tension thickening across the office. Victoria looked from Isaiah to the bracelet in silence. Thinking now instead of reacting. Grant recovered first. Men like him always did. Interesting, he said. You seem very invested in a family matter that doesn't concern you. Isaiah picked up his toolbox calmly. Broken things concern mechanics. Grant laughed once under his breath, but there was no humor in it. Victoria, this is ridiculous. We're interrogating a repairman because Emily misplaced jewelry. The car didn't malfunction naturally, Isaiah said quietly. Grant turned sharply toward him. And now you're an engineer too? Isaiah didn't rise to it. Didn't defend himself. He simply walked toward the open hood of the Rolls-Royce again as if the conversation mattered less than the machine. In some ways, it did. Victoria watched him through narrowed eyes while the others followed a few steps behind. Morning light spilled pale silver across the garage floor now. Somewhere outside, landscapers worked leaf blowers across wet stone paths while staff rushed through preparations for tonight's dinner. Inside the garage, everything narrowed to engine sounds, expensive tension, and one man refusing to perform for wealthy people. Isaiah leaned into the engine compartment, checking the fuel relay with slow deliberate movements. Grant stayed nearby like a man guarding territory. How long? He asked impatiently. Depends. On what? Isaiah glanced briefly toward the back seat of the Rolls-Royce. Whether somebody wants the car fixed. Grant's jaw flexed. Victoria noticed that too. Then a small sound interrupted the moment. A soft metallic clatter near the garage entrance. Everyone turned. One of the younger housemaids stood frozen beside a dropped tray of coffee cups, eyes wide with panic as hot coffee spread across the polished floor toward a rolling utility cart. I'm so sorry, she whispered immediately. I'm so sorry, Miss Ashford. The cart shifted suddenly toward her on the slick floor. Heavy. Fast. The maid stumbled backward in heels she clearly wasn't used to wearing. Before security even reacted, Isaiah moved. Quick. Controlled. He caught the side of the cart with one hand before it slammed into her knees, the impact rattling through his shoulder hard enough to make him wince once. Then he steadied the spilled tray with the other hand before the porcelain shattered completely. Silence followed. Not dramatic silence. Human silence. The kind that appears when somebody does something decent without checking who's watching first. The maid looked mortified. Sir, I'm sorry. Isaiah crouched carefully, picking up broken cup handles from the floor before anyone stepped on them. No harm done. Grant scoffed softly. You're bleeding. Isaiah looked down. A thin cut crossed his knuckles from the broken porcelain. Nothing serious. He grabbed the oil rag from his back pocket and wrapped it once around his hand. The same faded rag Caleb had once used to clean model rocket glue off the kitchen table. Victoria's eyes lingered there for a second. On the careful way he had pained so other people wouldn't panic around it. The maid reached shakily for the tray again. Isaiah stopped her gently. Hot coffee and shaking hands don't mix. It was such a small sentence. Quiet. Practical. But something inside Victoria visibly paused around it. Because Isaiah hadn't looked toward her once while helping. Hadn't tried to impress her. Hadn't used the moment to gain sympathy after being questioned all morning. He just helped because someone almost got hurt. Grant noticed Victoria noticing. That irritated him more than the accident itself. "Can we get back to reality now?" he snapped. Isaiah rose slowly from the floor. "Been in it the whole time." For a second, Victoria almost answered. Almost. Instead she looked toward the oil rag wrapped around his bleeding hand. Then toward the old toolbox still sitting open beside the car. Inside, partially visible beneath socket wrenches and loose receipts, rested a folded child's drawing of a rocket ship with the words, "Don't miss Friday, Dad." Victoria stared at it longer than she meant to. Long enough to realize something uncomfortable. Whatever this man was hiding, it wasn't greed. Then Evelyn's phone buzzed sharply beside her. She checked the screen and went pale almost immediately. "Miss Ashford," her voice lowered. "Emily's gone." By midnight, the Ashford estate looked less like a home and more like a museum trying to imitate one. Every light still glowed. Every hallway still polished. Every employee still moving carefully enough not to disturb the tension hanging beneath the marble ceilings. Victoria Ashford stood alone inside her glass office overlooking the dark gardens, one hand wrapped around a cup of coffee she had stopped drinking an hour ago. Cold now. Bitter. Her phone vibrated every few minutes across the desk. Board members asking about the engagement dinner. Grant sending clipped messages demanding updates. Her mother calling twice without leaving a voicemail. Emily still missing. Victoria ignored all of it for another 30 seconds and replayed the security footage again instead. Isaiah catching the utility cart before it crushed the maid's legs. Isaiah wrapping his bleeding hand with that faded oil rag like pain was something private. Isaiah kneeling beside a car worth more than most homes while everyone around him searched for reasons not to trust him. She paused the footage exactly where the old toolbox sat open beside him. The child's drawing was still visible inside. "Don't miss Friday, Dad." Victoria stared at the uneven block letters longer than she meant to. Something about them unsettled her. Not because they were emotional. Because they were ordinary. Real. She leaned back slowly in her chair. Outside the glass walls, the city lights of Lake Forest shimmered across wet pavement while rainwater slid down the windows in silver trails. Beautiful. Expensive. Empty. Evelyn knocked softly before entering. Still no sign of Emily. Victoria nodded once without turning around. Security. Checking train stations and rideshare records. Evelyn hesitated near the doorway. "Grant thinks we should contact the press before rumors start." Victoria finally looked up then. Tiredness sharpened her face in strange ways. "Grant thinks publicity is a form of oxygen." Evelyn almost smiled. Almost. Then her eyes drifted toward the paused camera frame on the screen. "You're watching him again." Victoria looked back at Isaiah frozen beside the Rolls-Royce. "I'm reviewing liability." Evelyn knew better than to challenge obvious lies directly. "The mechanic has a clean record," she said carefully instead. "Divorced. One son. No lawsuits. No arrests." Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. "You pulled a background check." Grant already had one running. That irritated her more than she expected. Not because it was wrong. Because she hadn't asked for it herself first. Evelyn stepped closer and placed a thin folder on the desk. "There's one thing, though." Victoria opened it silently. Employment history. Certifications. Trade school records. Mostly ordinary. Then one line caught her attention. Volunteer Youth Robotics Mentor. Southside Community Center. 5 years. Victoria blinked once. Looked back toward the paused frame of the rocket drawing. Then toward the toolbox. A mechanic teaching robotics. Evelyn shrugged lightly. People are usually more than one thing. The words lingered quietly in the room after she left. Victoria closed the file without meaning to. Somewhere deep down, that irritated her too. Because Isaiah Brooks no longer fit neatly into the category she had built for him within the first 30 seconds of hearing his voice. And she hated uncertainty. Especially in people. Across the city, Isaiah sat alone inside Brooks' auto under flickering fluorescent lights while the last load of laundry spun in the tiny backroom dryer. Caleb slept upstairs already, one arm hanging off the couch beneath the astronaut blanket. Isaiah should have been sleeping too. Instead he sat rebuilding a damaged alternator for a customer who couldn't afford a replacement. The radio played softly somewhere near the workbench. Midnight jazz. Static between stations. His bandaged knuckles tightened briefly when his phone buzzed again with another overdue payment reminder from the medical supplier. Past due in 48 hours. Isaiah silenced the notification without opening it. Then reached for the old toolbox beside him. The silver bracelet still rested inside now. He stared at the engraving for a long moment beneath the garage light. For when you're brave enough to leave. Caleb's sleepy voice drifted faintly from upstairs. Dad? Isaiah immediately stood. Yeah. You still coming Friday? The question carried more weight in that little apartment than billion-dollar contracts ever could. Isaiah looked at the unpaid invoice taped beside the workbench. Then toward the bracelet in his hand. Wouldn't miss it. Upstairs, Caleb settled back into the couch cushions again. Trusting him completely. Isaiah lowered his eyes for a second after the room went quiet. Men like him learned to carry fear silently so children could sleep. Back at the estate, Victoria stood alone in her dressing room preparing for a dinner she no longer wanted to attend. A diamond necklace lay untouched beside her phone while stylists waited nervously outside the door. She picked up the background file once more. Her eyes stopping this time on a handwritten emergency contact form clipped near the back. Caleb Brooks. Age 8. Severe respiratory condition. Victoria's fingers paused against the paper. Then slowly, almost unconsciously, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something she hadn't realized she'd kept. Isaiah's oil rag. Folded neatly after the maid had tried to throw it away. A faded patch of stitching crossed one corner in crooked blue thread. Small letters sewn by a child's hand. C.B. The elementary school gym smelled faintly of floor polish, construction paper, and burnt cafeteria coffee when Isaiah stepped through the double doors Friday morning with grease still faintly stained along the edge of his thumb. He'd changed shirts in the garage bathroom before coming. Dark blue button-up. Sleeves rolled neatly. Clean enough for career day even if exhaustion still sat beneath his eyes. Around him, other parents carried polished briefcases, military uniforms, hospital badges, corporate lanyards. People who looked easier to explain to children. Caleb sat cross-legged near the front row clutching a cardboard rocket painted silver and red. The moment he spotted Isaiah in the doorway, his whole posture changed. Relief first. Then pride. Quiet but immediate. Isaiah lifted one hand slightly in apology for being late. Caleb grinned anyway. That grin alone had dragged Isaiah through 3 unpaid bills, 2 sleepless nights, and another call from the medical supplier that morning. Near the back of the gym, Victoria Ashford stood completely out of place beneath fluorescent school lights. Cream coat. Sunglasses tucked into one hand. Evelyn beside her looking equally uncertain why they were standing inside a public elementary school on the south side at 9 in the morning. Victoria herself wasn't entirely sure either. She had told herself she came because Emily's rideshare records had pinged near this neighborhood overnight. That was the practical explanation. Safer than the truth. Safer than admitting she'd looked at Caleb Brooks' school address twice after finding the stitched initials on Isaiah's oil rag. Evelyn lowered her voice carefully. Miss Ashford, perhaps this isn't the best environment for you right now. Victoria watched Isaiah kneel beside Caleb to straighten the crooked paper fins on the boy's rocket. "People keep saying that," she murmured. The teacher at the front began introducing parents one by one. Accountant. Firefighter. Dentist. Then Caleb suddenly stood and pointed proudly toward Isaiah before the teacher even called his name. "That's my dad," he announced to the entire gym. "He fixes things nobody else can." A few parents glanced over automatically. Some politely. Some less so once they noticed Isaiah's worn work boots beside the folding chairs. Isaiah gave Caleb a look somewhere between embarrassment and affection. "Easy, astronaut." Caleb ignored him completely. "He rebuilt my breathing machine once with parts from a washing machine." The room laughed softly. Isaiah rubbed the back of his neck once. It wasn't that dramatic. But Victoria's attention sharpened quietly at the words rebuilt. She watched Isaiah the same way she'd watched the security footage now. Looking for inconsistencies. Instead she kept finding patience. Presence. The teacher smiled warmly toward Isaiah. "Mr. Brooks, would you like to tell us what you do?" Isaiah stood slowly beneath dozens of curious little eyes. He looked uncomfortable being observed. Not ashamed. Just unused to rooms where people listen before judging. "I repair engines," he said simply. "Cars mostly." One little girl frowned. "That sounds dirty." Caleb immediately answered for him. "Only before he fixes it." More laughter. Softer this time. "Kinder." Isaiah looked down at his son then. Something unguarded crossing his face for less than a second. Victoria noticed that too. Because powerful people often forgot how rare it was for someone to look at them without wanting something back. After the presentation, children crowded around tables covered in helmets, brochures, and gadgets. Caleb tugged Isaiah toward a corner display where another student's drone had crashed onto the gym floor. Adults stood nearby debating batteries and software while the embarrassed boy fought tears beside the broken machine. Isaiah crouched instinctively. "Mind if I look?" The boy nodded silently. Isaiah turned the drone over once in his hands, calm and careful. Victoria watched from several feet away while other parents continued whispering about her presence in the school. One mother even lifted her phone slightly like she recognized Victoria from magazine covers. Isaiah ignored all of it. "Propeller housing snapped," he said quietly to the boy. "Doesn't mean it's dead." The child sniffed hard. "Can you fix it?" Isaiah reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the same small screwdriver set he carried everywhere beside his old truck keys. Tools worn smooth from years of use. He handed the boy one of the screwdrivers instead of taking over himself. "I can help you fix it." That landed somewhere unexpectedly deep inside Victoria. Not the repair. The choice. The way he handed dignity back to a child instead of becoming the hero in front of a crowd. Caleb looked up at her suddenly then. Children noticed watching adults the way mechanics notice strange engine sounds. "You're the rich lady," he said plainly. Evelyn nearly choked beside her. But Victoria only nodded once. Caleb studied her expensive coat for a second before asking, "You ever fix anything yourself?" Silence. Small. Honest. Victoria looked across the gym toward Isaiah helping the nervous little boy tighten the drone screws with patient hands. Then down at the folded oil rag still hidden inside her purse beside her phone. "Not as much as I should," she admitted quietly. Caleb accepted that answer with surprising seriousness. "My dad says broken stuff gets worse when rich people ignore it." Victoria almost smiled despite herself. Almost. Then her phone buzzed sharply in her hand. Grant Mercer. 3 missed calls. 1 message. "Do not let that man near Emily." Victoria's eyes lifted immediately toward Isaiah across the gym floor just as another parent nearby lowered their phone after secretly taking a picture of him standing beside her son. The picture hit the local parent groups before noon. Grainy. Cropped badly. But clear enough to start damage. A black mechanic standing close to Victoria Ashford at an elementary school while her bodyguard looked tense in the background. Another frame showed Isaiah kneeling beside a child with tools in his hands. No sound. No context. Just enough for people to invent the rest themselves. By 1 o'clock, the whispers had already reached the Ashford estate. Staff members lowering voices when Victoria entered hallways. Security exchanging glances near elevators. Someone from the board texting Evelyn, "Who is this man?" Victoria stood inside the executive conference room staring at her phone while city light reflected coldly across the glass table. The picture sat open beneath dozens of comments. Some curious. Some cruel. Gold digger. Publicity stunt. Why is she bringing strangers around the family now? Victoria locked the screen without responding. But her jaw stayed tight. Across town, Isaiah learned about the photo because Caleb came home quieter than usual. The boy dropped his backpack beside the apartment door without speaking first. That alone was enough to make Isaiah notice. Children carried silence differently after being embarrassed. Something happened. Isaiah asked from the kitchen sink. Caleb shrugged too fast. Nothing. Isaiah dried his hands slowly and waited. Patience usually worked better than pressure with scared kids. Finally Caleb pulled a folded paper from his hoodie pocket and slid it across the table. A printout of the photo. Someone had circled Victoria in red marker. Underneath, another kid had written, "Your dad works for rich white ladies now." Isaiah read it once. Folded it neatly again. Caleb watched him carefully, almost expecting anger. Instead Isaiah just placed the paper beside the unpaid medical bill and reached for the spaghetti pot on the stove. "Kids repeat what they hear adults say," he said quietly. Caleb frowned. "You mad?" Isaiah shook his head once. "No, why not?" He looked over at his son then. Calm. Tired. Honest. Because being misunderstood and being wrong aren't always the same thing. The apartment fell quiet except for traffic hissing through wet streets outside. Caleb sat down slowly at the table. "You still gonna work for them?" Isaiah opened the fridge. Half empty again. "I work for whoever needs fixing." He said it simply. No bitterness. But the truth carried weight anyway. His phone buzzed before dinner even reached the plates. "Brooks Auto Garage." Isaiah answered immediately. "Yeah." His manager's voice came rough through static. "Need you to stay away from high-profile clients for a while." Isaiah leaned against the counter silently. "Somebody complained." "Somebody important did." The manager hesitated. "Isaiah. I know you didn't do anything. But optics matter." Optics. Funny word. Sounded cleaner than judgment. Isaiah stared toward Caleb's inhaler sitting near the sink. Understood. The call ended. Just like that. 2 shifts gone next week. Maybe more. Caleb noticed the change in his face immediately even though Isaiah barely moved. "Was that work?" Isaiah nodded once and carried the plates to the table anyway. Parent first. Fear later. Meanwhile, at the Ashford estate, Victoria sat alone in the security office reviewing footage again while rain tapped softly against the mansion windows. The viral school photo glowed beside surveillance clips from the garage. 2 worlds colliding badly on adjacent screens. Evelyn stood near the doorway holding another stack of messages from board members demanding explanations. "Grant says this is becoming a reputational issue." Victoria didn't answer immediately. She replayed the school footage instead. Isaiah helping the little boy fix the broken drone. Caleb looking at him like trust itself had a face. Then another clip from the garage appeared. Isaiah catching the utility cart before it hit the maid. Victoria paused the frame again. Something bothered her now. Not Isaiah. The timing. She leaned closer toward the monitor. Back it up 3 seconds. Evelyn obeyed. The footage rewound slowly. Grant entering frame. The bracelet already missing from the desk before anyone noticed. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. Pause. There. Barely visible in the reflection of the glass cabinet behind Grant. His hand near the bracelet before the confrontation even started. Evelyn frowned. You think he moved it? Victoria stayed silent too long to dismiss the possibility anymore. But before she could answer, another notification flashed across her phone. Security request, remove Isaiah Brooks from all Ashford property access lists. Requested by Grant Mercer. Victoria stared at the approval button without touching it. Across the city, Caleb quietly opened his backpack while Isaiah washed dishes in silence nearby. Inside the bag sat the silver rocket from career day. But taped carefully around its middle now was something Isaiah had never seen before. A tiny strip of blue thread. The exact same color stitched into the oil rag Victoria still kept hidden in her purse. Isaiah found Emily behind the shuttered bus depot a little after 9, sitting on a concrete bench beneath a flickering light while the city moved around her like it had no idea a rich girl could disappear in plain sight. She wore a gray hoodie over the dress she was supposed to wear to her engagement dinner, her hair tucked beneath the hood, one hand closed tightly around the broken silver bracelet. Rainwater dripped from the edge of the shelter onto her shoes. She looked less like an heiress than a frightened kid who had finally run out of places to be brave. Isaiah didn't rush her. He stopped several feet away, toolbox in one hand, phone buzzing in his pocket with calls he already knew he shouldn't ignore. Caleb's school. Then his manager. Then the medical supplier. Each vibration pressed against his ribs like a small warning. Emily looked up when she heard his boots on the wet pavement. Did my mother send you? Isaiah shook his head once. No, her chin trembled, but she swallowed it down. Then why are you here? He set the toolbox gently beside the bench. Because somebody should ask if you're okay before they ask where you've been. That broke something small in her face. Not tears. Not yet. Just the effort it took to keep them back. A police cruiser rolled slowly past the intersection, headlights sweeping over the depot windows. Emily flinched. Isaiah noticed. Said nothing. He only shifted slightly so his body blocked the light from hitting her directly. A small thing. Costly anyway. Because across town, Caleb was waiting for him to bring home medicine. Because his next shift had already been cut. Because being seen with Emily now, alone and after dark, would make every lie easier for people who already wanted one. His phone buzzed again. Caleb's teacher this time. Isaiah let it ring out. Emily saw it. You should answer. In a minute. This is going to get you in trouble. Isaiah looked toward the empty street, the rain-slick pavement glowing under broken neon. Trouble was already coming. She stared at him like she didn't know what to do with a man who didn't bargain kindness into leverage. I can pay you, she whispered. If you help me leave. Isaiah's expression changed then. Slightly. Not offended. Not cold. Just firm. Don't buy help when you're scared. Emily lowered her eyes to the bracelet in her palm. The engraving caught the depot light for half a second. For when you're brave enough to leave. Isaiah saw it again and understood only enough to know he did not understand everything. That was enough to make him careful. He took off his worn jacket and handed it to her without stepping too close. Put this on. You're shaking. My mother thinks I'm dramatic. Mothers can be wrong and still be afraid. Emily looked up at that. It was the first time she looked at him not as a mechanic, not as a stranger, but as someone who might know the difference between fear and disrespect. Behind them, a black SUV turned into the depot lot. Then another. Ashford Security. Isaiah exhaled once through his nose. Slow. He had maybe 10 seconds to decide who he was going to be in this version of the story. He could step away. Let them take her. Protect his name. Protect his son. Protect what little work he had left. Instead, he picked up his toolbox, placed himself beside the bench but not in front of Emily, and waited with both hands visible. The guards approached fast, raincoats flapping, one already speaking into a radio. Step away from the girl. Isaiah didn't move. She's not property. The lead guard's face hardened. You want to make this worse for yourself? Isaiah glanced down at the old truck key in his palm, then toward his phone buzzing again. Caleb. This time his son's name lit the screen. The hardest part of being a father was knowing love could pull you in two directions and still expect you to stand straight. Isaiah silenced the phone and slid it into his pocket. Emily noticed. So did the guard. Last chance, the man said. Isaiah's voice stayed low. Call her mother. Tell her I found her safe. That's all I'm giving you. Minutes later, Victoria arrived in a town car with Evelyn beside her and Grant's messages still flashing unanswered on her phone. She stepped into the rain and stopped when she saw Isaiah's jacket around Emily's shoulders, his cut hand still wrapped in the stained oil rag, his toolbox on the ground like he had chosen work over panic. Her first instinct was control. Her second was suspicion. But then she saw Emily's fingers gripping the sleeve of Isaiah's jacket like it was the first safe thing she had touched all day. Victoria's face tightened. Mr. Brooks. Isaiah turned toward her, tired now in a way even pride couldn't fully hide. She needs warmth. Not questions. Grant's voice came through Victoria's phone on speaker before she could answer, sharp and polished. Victoria, keep him away from her. He's manipulating this. Isaiah heard it. Emily heard it. The guards heard it. Still, Isaiah didn't defend himself. He only bent, picked up the toolbox, and stepped back into the rain, giving mother and daughter space he had not been granted himself. Victoria watched him go. Then Evelyn leaned close and whispered something from the school office callback Isaiah had missed. Caleb Brooks had been sent home early after a breathing episode. Victoria looked down at the jacket around Emily's shoulders. Then at the wet pavement where Isaiah's old truck had already begun to pull away, heading south without payment, without thanks, and without knowing that his son was waiting for him at an urgent care desk. The hospital hallway smelled like antiseptic, burnt coffee, and exhaustion by the time Victoria Ashford found Isaiah sitting alone beneath the fluorescent lights outside Caleb's room. It was nearly midnight again. The city beyond the emergency room windows had dissolved into rain and ambulance reflections, but Isaiah still wore the same damp work boots from the bus depot, the same wrinkled shirt from career day, the same quiet expression of a man too tired to explain himself anymore. His old toolbox rested beside the vending machine near his chair. Closed now. Guarded. Victoria slowed when she saw him through the glass doors. For a second, she almost turned around. Because wealthy people like her knew how to solve problems with signatures, lawyers, money, influence. This felt different. This felt like walking toward evidence that she might have been wrong about a human being. Evelyn remained several steps behind, carrying a thin folder pulled from old Ashford archives. You don't have to do this tonight, she whispered carefully. Victoria looked through the small hospital room window where Caleb slept curled beneath pale blankets, oxygen tubing resting beneath his nose. Then toward Isaiah, elbows on his knees, staring silently at the floor like he was counting problems instead of hours. I think I do, she said quietly. Isaiah noticed her only when her heels stopped near his chair. He stood immediately out of habit more than respect. Men raised without power often learned to stand whenever discomfort entered the room. Victoria hated noticing that. How is he? She asked. Isaiah glanced toward the room. Breathing better. His voice sounded rougher tonight. Fatigue stripping away whatever energy pride usually protected. Victoria looked toward the admissions desk where unpaid paperwork sat clipped to a board. She noticed the amount due highlighted in red. Then the missed calls still lighting Isaiah's phone screen on the chair beside him. Garage manager. Medical supplier. Unknown numbers. Life collecting debts while he sat beside his son anyway. You should have answered your phone earlier, she said softly before thinking. Isaiah looked at her calmly. Not defensive. Just honest. My son needed me first. That landed harder than she expected. Victoria lowered her eyes briefly to the oil rag folded beside his toolbox. The blue stitching. C.B. She reached slowly into her purse and placed the matching strip of blue thread from Caleb's rocket onto the chair between them. Isaiah stared at it for half a second too long. Caleb made that? She asked. He fixes things he thinks are lonely. Victoria almost smiled at that. Almost. Then she opened the folder Evelyn had brought. Old paper smell drifting faintly into the hallway air. I found something strange in your records. Isaiah's shoulders stiffened slightly. Tiny movement. But real. You taught robotics at a community center, she continued. You rebuilt medical equipment from scrap parts. And, she hesitated now. Someone from our old foundation remembers your name. Isaiah's jaw tightened almost invisibly. People remember all kinds of things. One of the archive donor reports mentioned a student team from the South Side winning a national engineering competition 12 years ago. Victoria looked directly at him now. Lead mentor, Isaiah Brooks. Silence. Long enough for the hallway monitor to beep twice behind them. Isaiah looked toward Caleb's room before answering. That was a long time ago. Why leave? Victoria asked quietly. Why disappear into a garage? Isaiah picked up the old truck keys from his pocket and turned them once in his hand. Habit. Delay. Defense. Some things stop mattering after certain losses. It wasn't enough of an answer. But it wasn't nothing either. Victoria felt it immediately. The shape of grief hiding beneath restraint. Before she could ask more, a nurse approached holding a clipboard. Mr. Brooks? Isaiah stood at once. Your insurance only approved partial coverage, the nurse explained apologetically. We'll need a payment arrangement by morning. Victoria instinctively reached for her purse. Isaiah noticed before she even spoke. Don't, he said quietly. Not harsh. But immediate. The nurse shifted awkwardly between them. Victoria frowned slightly. This isn't charity. Isaiah looked at her then. Truly looked at her. That's exactly why it can't feel like pity. The word settled between them like something heavier than pride. Victoria slowly lowered her hand from her purse. For the first time in years, money had failed her before she even offered it. Down the hallway, Evelyn suddenly stepped closer holding another file she had just received from Estate Security. Miss Ashford, her voice lowered. You need to see this. Victoria took the folder slowly. Inside sat a blurred still image from an older security archive dated nearly 11 years earlier. Grainy. Low quality. But unmistakable. A much younger Isaiah Brooks standing beside a teenage girl near an Ashford charity event downtown. And in the girl's hand was the exact same silver bracelet Emily wore now. The problem with Almost Truths was how convincing they looked under fluorescent light. By dawn, the Ashford legal team had already turned the old security image into something dangerous. Grainy footage. Isaiah standing near a teenage girl 11 years earlier. The same silver bracelet visible on her wrist. No context. No explanation. Just enough for frightened people to protect themselves before asking questions. Victoria sat at the end of the conference table while lawyers, board members, and security advisors spoke around her in clipped professional tones. Liability exposure. Reputational risk. Potential manipulation. Grant Mercer stood near the window, calm again now that the room had shifted back into language wealthy people understood. He inserted himself into this family long before any of us realized it, Grant said evenly. Now Emily disappears and somehow he's the one who finds her. Victoria stared silently at the frozen still image projected across the wall. Isaiah younger. Thinner. Standing beside that unknown girl at an Ashford outreach event downtown. Her stomach tightened. Because the fear inside her no longer came from scandal. It came from uncertainty. Evelyn slid another folder quietly toward Victoria. The archive is incomplete, she whispered carefully. Several files from that foundation year are missing. Grant overheard anyway. Convenient. Victoria hated how quickly that word made her defensive now. Hated even more that she could no longer tell whether she was defending herself or Isaiah. Across town, Isaiah sat beside Caleb's hospital bed while morning rain streaked softly down the windows. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and plastic tubing. Caleb slept curled toward the wall, his small hand still clutching the silver rocket from career day. Isaiah hadn't slept at all. He sat with one elbow on his knee, turning the old truck key slowly between tired fingers while overdue bills rested folded inside his jacket pocket. The nurse had already asked twice about payment arrangements. His manager had stopped calling entirely. Silence usually meant decisions had already been made. His phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Isaiah answered quietly so Caleb wouldn't wake. Mr. Brooks, a formal voice said immediately. This is Ashford Legal. You are no longer authorized on any Ashford property pending investigation. Isaiah closed his eyes briefly. Not surprised. Just tired enough for disappointment to feel physical now. Understood. Will also require the return of any estate-related materials in your possession. His gaze shifted toward the old toolbox near the chair. Toward the bracelet hidden carefully inside beneath Caleb's drawing. You'll get them. The voice softened slightly. Mr. Brooks, if there's something you'd like to explain, now would be the time. Isaiah looked toward his sleeping son before answering. People determined to misunderstand usually arrive early. He ended the call gently. No anger. No argument. Just another door closing quietly. Hours later, Victoria arrived at the hospital carrying an envelope from accounting she hadn't fully thought through before leaving the estate. Financial assistance paperwork. Private specialist contacts. A check large enough to erase every visible problem in Isaiah's life. She found him standing near the vending machines refilling Caleb's water cup. Exhaustion had hollowed shadows beneath his eyes now, but he still stood straight when he saw her. Habit. Dignity. Distance. Victoria held out the envelope awkwardly. For Caleb. Isaiah didn't take it. No, the answer came too fast. Not rude. But absolute. Victoria frowned slightly. This isn't charity. You already said that once. He set the water cup down carefully before looking at her fully. And it still feels the same. The hallway went silent around them except for the low hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Victoria's grip tightened unconsciously around the envelope. You're losing work because of us. Because of assumptions, Isaiah corrected quietly. There's a difference. The words landed harder than accusation would have. Because he still refused to make her the villain even now. Caleb's voice drifted sleepily from the room behind them. Dad? Isaiah turned immediately toward the doorway. Instinct before pride. Always. Caleb blinked awake slowly, noticing Victoria standing there. Then his eyes dropped toward the envelope in her hands. Children understood more than adults liked to admit. "Are they firing you?" he asked softly. The question cut through the hallway cleaner than any lawyer ever could. Isaiah walked back into the room and adjusted the blanket around Caleb's shoulders before answering. "No one decides who I am that fast." Caleb nodded slowly like he wanted to believe him. But fear still lingered quietly in the boy's face. Victoria saw it. And for the first time since this began, guilt stopped feeling abstract. She placed the envelope untouched on the chair and turned to leave before saying something worse. But just as she reached the hallway corner, Evelyn hurried toward her carrying a laptop with panic written across her expression. "Victoria." She lowered her voice immediately. "The missing archive footage." Victoria stopped cold. "What about it?" Evelyn turned the screen toward her. A newly recovered camera angle flickered under the hospital hallway lights. Same charity event. Same night. Younger Isaiah kneeling beside the teenage girl with the bracelet. But this time the footage continued long enough to show something the other clip had hidden. The girl collapsing. Isaiah catching her before she hit the pavement. And in the background, barely visible near the crowd, stood a much younger Victoria Ashford watching the entire thing happen. The Ashford boardroom had been designed to make hesitation feel expensive. Floor-to-ceiling glass. Black marble. A table long enough to separate power from consequence by several feet of polished silence. By noon, every seat was filled. Lawyers. Advisors. Security. Grant Mercer near the windows with his jaw set hard enough to crack glass. Victoria Ashford stood alone at the head of the room beside the main monitor while rain dimmed the skyline behind her. Nobody spoke when the recovered footage began playing. Grainy at first. Then clearer. 11 years earlier. A charity event downtown funded by the Ashford Foundation. Young volunteers moving through crowded tents. A teenage girl weaving unsteadily through the noise with the silver bracelet loose around her wrist. Then her knees buckling. The room watched Isaiah Brooks appear from the edge of frame, younger but unmistakably the same man. Calm. Fast. Catching her before she struck the pavement. Calling for help while others froze. Victoria remembered it now. Not perfectly. But enough. The girl had suffered a panic collapse after fleeing an abusive foster placement connected to one of the foundation shelters. Isaiah had stayed with her for hours until emergency services arrived. "Freeze it there," Victoria said quietly. The image stopped on Isaiah wrapping his old jacket around the terrified girl while reporters crowded uselessly nearby. Then another figure stepped partially into frame. Young Victoria herself. Watching. Saying nothing. Grant stood immediately. "This proves nothing except proximity." Victoria turned toward him slowly. "No. It proves we removed context because context was inconvenient." The room fell still. One board member adjusted his glasses nervously. Another avoided looking at the screen entirely. Victoria opened the second folder Evelyn had recovered from storage archives. Missing pages now restored. Engineering scholarship recommendations. Volunteer records. Community outreach report signed by Isaiah Brooks. One page carried a handwritten note from an Ashford executive years earlier: candidate declined foundation position after family emergency. Exceptional aptitude. "You knew about him?" one of the board members asked quietly. Victoria answered without looking away from the documents. "Apparently I forgot the parts that didn't fit my assumptions." Grant scoffed softly. "Victoria, you're risking the company's reputation over a mechanic." She looked up then. Really looked at him. "No. I'm risking my reputation because I failed to see a decent man standing in front of me." Silence. Heavy now. Earned. Across town, Isaiah sat beside Caleb's hospital bed repairing the loose wheel on the boy's silver rocket with a screwdriver from his toolbox. The room was quiet except for oxygen flow and distant overhead announcements. Caleb watched him carefully. Did the rich lady stop being mad? Isaiah adjusted the tiny will before answering. People aren't always mad when they're afraid. Caleb thought about that seriously. You still helping them? Isaiah's hands paused briefly over the rocket. Helping somebody and trusting them aren't always the same thing either. His phone buzzed moments later. Evelyn. Isaiah nearly ignored it. Then answered anyway. Mr. Brooks, she said softly, Miss Ashford is making a statement. He closed his eyes briefly. Tiredness settled deep in his bones now. That's her choice. She wants you here. Isaiah looked toward Caleb first. Always Caleb first. No, he said quietly. She needs to tell the truth whether I'm standing beside her or not. Back at the estate, cameras from local business media had already gathered in the lobby after rumors spread through the board. Victoria stepped before them without notes, one hand resting lightly against the edge of the podium to steady herself. The silver bracelet sat beside her on the marble surface beneath the lights. Emotional object. Evidence. Memory. Consequence. An employee and private citizen named Isaiah Brooks has been falsely treated as a threat because incomplete information was allowed to become assumption, she said slowly. No corporate polish left in her voice now. That failure belongs to this company. And to me. Reporters shifted immediately. Questions started flying. Grant moved toward the stage, furious now. Victoria, stop this. She ignored him. Mr. Brooks protected my daughter when others were more concerned with optics than truth. He was denied dignity because people found it easier to believe suspicion than character. Somewhere inside the silence that followed, the room itself seemed embarrassed. Victoria turned toward security next. Restore his property access immediately. And release the full footage. Grant's expression hardened. You're making a mistake. Victoria picked up the bracelet slowly. No, she said quietly. I made one already. Hours later, the hospital television replayed clips of the statement while Isaiah sat silently beside Caleb's bed under dim afternoon light. He didn't smile. Didn't celebrate. He only watched long enough to make sure the truth had finally been spoken out loud. Then he turned the television off before the commentators started talking over it. Caleb looked up sleepily. Dad? Isaiah adjusted the blanket around him. Yeah. The boy hesitated before asking the question quietly enough to hurt. Does this mean they respect you now? Isaiah looked toward the silver bracelet resting beside his toolbox near the chair. Then toward the rain sliding down the hospital window. Respect that arrives late, he said softly, still has to learn how to stay. A gentle knock interrupted the room. Isaiah turned toward the doorway. Victoria stood there alone this time. No lawyers. No security. No cameras. Just the oil rag folded carefully in her hands. 3 weeks later, the garage lights at Brooks Auto still flickered the same way when the weather turned cold. Nothing about the building had suddenly become magical because the truth came out. The concrete floor still carried old oil stains. The waiting room coffee still tasted burnt by noon. Bills still arrived folded sharp and unforgiving beneath the apartment door upstairs. Real life stayed real. But some things had shifted quietly. The kind of shift you only noticed when silence stopped feeling heavy. Caleb sat cross-legged near the office heater finishing homework beside his silver rocket, now repaired properly with balanced fins and fresh paint around the cracked edge. The blue thread remained wrapped carefully around the middle. Isaiah had left it there. Through the garage window, rainwater no longer hammered the glass. It only drifted softly now beneath pale afternoon light. Isaiah tightened the final bolt on an old sedan engine and lowered the hood carefully. The customer thanked him twice before leaving. Isaiah only nodded once, wiping his hands with the same oil rag stitched crookedly with C.B. The rag looked cleaner now. Still worn. Still real. Just cared for. Upstairs, the portable breathing machine hummed steadily for the first time without cutting out every few minutes. Victoria had arranged the supplier issue anonymously after learning exactly how Isaiah's insurance claim had been delayed. Isaiah knew it was her anyway. He never mentioned it. She never pretended it came from nowhere. That was the closest thing they had to peace right now. A soft knock sounded against the open garage door near closing time. Isaiah looked up from the workbench. Victoria stood there beside the rain-dark sidewalk in a charcoal coat without assistance, security, or polished speeches trailing behind her this time. Just 2 cups of coffee warming her hands against the cold. Caleb noticed her first and grinned immediately. Rich lady's back. Victoria almost smiled at the title now. Almost. I brought peace offerings, she said, lifting the coffee cup slightly. Isaiah studied her quietly for a second before stepping aside from the garage entrance. Not inviting her in exactly. But not shutting the door either. Progress sometimes looked like space instead of closeness. Victoria walked inside slowly, eyes moving across the little garage details she hadn't really seen the first time. The old truck keys hanging beside the calendar. Caleb's backpack patched twice near the straps. School drawings taped beside repair invoices. Ordinary life. Held together carefully. Caleb took one of the coffees before Isaiah could object. Dad still burns his coffee at home, he informed her seriously. Some traditions survive hardship, Isaiah replied dryly, finally earning a real laugh from Caleb. Victoria watched the exchange quietly. That small warmth between father and son. Unperformed. Unbought. It unsettled her less now. Maybe because she no longer mistook gentleness for weakness. She reached into her coat pocket after a moment and placed the silver bracelet carefully on the workbench beside Isaiah's toolbox. Emily asked me to return it properly, she said softly. Isaiah glanced down at it beneath the garage lights. The engraving still visible against worn silver. For when you're brave enough to leave. But now it felt different somehow. Less like escape. More like survival. How is she? He asked. Victoria leaned lightly against the edge of the workbench. Honest for the first time in years. A pause settled between them. Not uncomfortable. Just careful. Grant resigned, she added quietly. Isaiah only nodded once. No satisfaction. No victory in his face. Caleb looked between them curiously. So nobody's mad anymore? The question hung gently in the garage air beside the ticking sound of cooling engines. Victoria answered first this time. Some people just learn slower than others. Caleb seemed satisfied with that. He returned to his rocket. Isaiah folded the oil rag once and set it beside the bracelet. 2 worn things surviving longer than expected. Victoria watched his hands for a moment before speaking again. I spent most of my life thinking respect came from being impossible to hurt. Isaiah leaned back against the workbench across from her. And now? Rain tapped softly against the garage roof overhead. Somewhere down the street, children laughed while a bus hissed to a stop. Victoria looked toward Caleb first before answering. Now I think maybe it comes from what you protect even when nobody claps for it. Isaiah didn't respond immediately. He rarely rushed words that mattered. Finally he picked up the repaired silver rocket from the desk and handed it back to Caleb. Careful with the landing fins this time, astronaut. Caleb smiled sleepily and hugged the rocket against his chest. Safe. The garage grew quieter as evening settled around them. No grand declarations arrived. No dramatic kiss. No fairy tale ending pretending wounds disappeared overnight. Just warm coffee instead of cold. Open doors instead of locked ones. And one tired black father who never raised his voice once, somehow teaching a woman surrounded by power how to trust silence again.